Senator Tom Cotton joins me. He is a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He graduated from Harvard Law School and Harvard undergrad. So he's a smart guy. Senator Cotton, good morning.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be on with you. Although sometimes I think the Senate Intelligence Committee may be an oxymoron.
Well, I got to ask, as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and specifically as a Harvard Law grad, do you know how much a gold bar, a standard gold bar, weighs?
I do not. I know it's heavy.
It's 27 pounds. So I am curious. I didn't know. I kind of figured that HLS graduates wouldn't know something as ordinary as that. But it's 27 pounds. When a senator comes back from abroad, do you go through customs?
You do, Hugh. Yeah, you have to fill out the normal customs sheet, and you're subject to normal customs rules. And I see where you're driving on this with Senator Menendez. I mean, if he came back with a gold bar from Egypt, which I think is well above the value one would have to declare, it probably should have been done.
Have you ever been stopped by a TS? I mean, you're a senator, and they've got like a little aura around you as you move through Dulles. I don't know how he got the gold bars back in. That's my question. I have very specific questions. Did anyone not notice the gold bars? Did that come up?
No, it is a good question, Hugh. It is a good question. It's something I'm sure that Senator Menendez will have to answer sooner or later, and a lot of his Democratic colleagues may have to answer today as well when they get back to Washington after having dodged the press on this for 3 days.
I think it's the greatest story ever. He's not my favorite Democrat, Senator Goldbar Bob. All right, let me get to the serious stuff, Senator. The Semaphore put out a blockbuster an hour ago. In the spring of 2014, senior Iranian foreign ministry officials initiated a quiet effort to bolster Tehran's image and positions on global security issues, particularly its nuclear program, by building ties with a network of influential overseas academics and researchers. They called it the Iran Experts Initiative. The officials, working under the President Hassan Rouhani, congratulated themselves on the impact of the initiative. At least 3 of the people on the foreign ministry's list were or became top aides to Robert Malley, the Biden administration's special envoy on Iran, who was placed on leave this June following the suspension of his security clearance. Have you heard of this story before? Has this crossed your radar before?
Sure. I've long been aware of efforts by Iran's government to try to influence public opinion in the United States and Europe. That shouldn't surprise anyone. Malevolent dictatorships like the Islamic Republic of Iran or Communist China or Vladimir Putin's Russia try to manipulate public opinion in democracies to suit their favor. I think it raises more questions, not only for Rob Malley, who's been a water carrier for Iran for decades, but also for Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, about how he could have allowed someone like this at the highest reaches of our government to be negotiating sensitive security matters with the world's worst state sponsor of terrorism and an implacable adversary of America.
Now, Senator, is there any real difference between grants, scholarships, travel, speaking fees, and gold bars? Because somehow the Iran Initiatives Project, they got their influence some way. We don't know, but I want to point out to people, everything is convertible into cash. Gold bars are not particularly convertible, but they're obvious. What do you think the people on the receiving end of this operation got?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it should be explored. To the point about whether it's all that different from a gold bar, I'm reminded of an NBA basketball player who frequently got traded and was asked if he didn't like moving teams so much, and he just laughed and said, the cash check's the same wherever I play. So
it's all convertible. And so Menendez is catching the heat, but everyone on the Iran initiatives list ought to be getting the heat too. Senator, let's move to ATACMS. I sent you a note over the weekend. When did you first urge Team Biden to send the ATACMS, which were approved this week? Because I think it's at least February of this year. Did you find anything earlier?
At least February, Hugh. It may have been earlier. I mean, for that matter, I can't remember any time in which I opposed any weapons delivery to Ukraine. My point from the very beginning, even before the war started, to try to prevent the war from happening, which would have been the best outcome, obviously, is that we should provide Ukraine everything they need to defend their territory. Once the war did start, we should have provided them immediately with everything they needed to fight back the invasion. You know, even 6 weeks, 2 months into the war, Hugh, it was obvious the Battle of Kyiv had been won, and was winding down, and Russia would shift to eastern Ukraine, which required a different kind of weapon, on relatively flat plains, in which Russia was going to be using heavy armor and artillery. But at every turn, Joe Biden has been racked by unwarranted anxiety about threats of Russian escalation. He's always given Ukraine just enough weapons, just in time to prevent them from losing, but never given them the weapons they need to simply win and to take back their own territory from this unprovoked invasion by Russia. That's one reason why the war has dragged on longer than any of us would have hoped and been bloodier than any of us would have hoped. And now you've got President Biden and his senior officials patting themselves on the back for finally providing these needful long-range missiles just at the very end of Ukraine's offensive, after it's going to have to wind down in the next 30 to 40 days because of weather conditions in Ukraine.
Now, Senator, the New York Times today has a story. The very first Abrams tank that we sent to Ukraine arrived yesterday. So when do you actually think the ATACMS will get there? Because I think they promised Abrams tanks last year sometime.
Yeah, they should get there faster than the Abrams did, in part because Ukraine already has the HIMARS launchers that these long-range missiles can be used for. Abrams are obviously something that takes a little bit more time to train. I met some of the Ukrainian crews on the actual tanks last month when I was in Germany with the Arkansas National Guard, where the Ukrainians were training on these tanks. But they should have had these months ago. They should have had them more than a year ago. Remember, in the early days of the war, when you had European countries that wanted to provide Ukraine with F-16s, and Joe Biden vetoed it, and the argument was, well, it will take a year to get them trained up. Well, wouldn't it have been nice for Ukraine to have more F-16s and trained up on it this February as opposed to next July? This is, again, an example of Joe Biden pussyfooting around, engaged in hesitant half measures that have done nothing but prolong this war and make it harder for Ukraine to defend its own territory.
Now, Senator, Republicans in the Senate are overwhelmingly in favor of additional aid for Ukraine. House Republicans, I believe a strong majority, but not overwhelmingly favor more aid to Ukraine. There is a significant, though, not anywhere near a majority of Republicans in the House oppose Ukrainian aid. When you have a good conversation with people, not talking points, but when you actually sit down and talk with them, what do you tell them about why you support Ukraine and why we ought to send more aid to them and get it there sooner?
Well, it's important for not just members of the House and Senate, but your listeners and all Americans know that we're supporting Ukraine not simply because we admire their courage and their pluck and their skill, which we do. We support them because it's good for America. It's just like why Ronald Reagan supported, say, Solidarity in Poland, or why he supported the Contras in Nicaragua. He admired them, yes, but ultimately it was in America's interests in our global struggle against Soviet Russia. And that's the case in Ukraine as well. If Western will falters in Ukraine, if Ukraine has an unsatisfactory settlement imposed upon it, Vladimir Putin will no doubt be viewed as the victor here. He'll be able to begin to rebuild his military. They're already producing missiles at higher rates than they were when the war started. And next on the block would be the rest of Ukraine, or it could be Poland or a Baltic state.
Now, Senator, we don't believe in regime change, but the only way Putin leaves other than in a box, because of natural causes, is because the Ukrainian war drags him down. Are you optimistic about Russia post-Putin, or are you pessimistic about Russia post-Putin?
I think a healthy degree of pessimism about Russia is always warranted, Hugh, whether it's Tsarist, communist, or Putinist Russia. As I said during the Wagner Group mutiny back in June, it's America's concern which strongman governs in Moscow. Our concern is that Russia not feel emboldened to continue to press its war in Ukraine and potentially even take that war into NATO territory, and even more in our vital national security interests, that communist China not learn dangerous lessons from Ukraine, that they can go for the jugular in Taiwan and expect Western will to fold immediately or fold very quickly in terms of their timelines. These wars, Hugh, can sometimes happen, as the critics of our support for Ukraine say, in places that most Americans couldn't pick off the map. Well, most Americans, Hugh, might not have been able to pick Manchuria off the map in 1931 or pick Abyssinia off the map in 1935, but if the League of Nations hadn't been humiliated in Manchuria, or Great Britain had closed the Suez Canal with Mussolini's warships in 1935, the history of World War II might have been very different.
Senator, I want to close by asking about the funding dilemma. Congressman Hill, French Hill, was on last hour talking about how conservatives in the House want to get the wins locked in from the debt ceiling deal. I know that Republicans in the Senate do as well. What do you expect to happen? Leader McConnell is trying to thread the needle here, as is Speaker McCarthy, but what do you expect is going to happen?
Well, Hugh, I gather that the House is coming back into session day and will vote to start debate on 4 different spending bills, the defense bill among them. I hope that passes today. And then as that debate moves forward, I think Speaker McCarthy hopes to pass a short-term funding bill to allow the House to continue in the orderly consideration of those spending bills. Again, I hope that happens.
And we will follow that. I will talk with you later in the day about that, Senator. Thank you for joining me. Remember, if you see Senator Menendez today, to pass along my interview request, because there's lots I want to learn about customs and TSA from him.
All right, you.
I honestly, I defy anyone not to have their blood pressure going up when they go through customs and they're returning to the United States. Thank you, Senator Cotton.